I found out that I was HIV positive in 2012, so just about 10 years ago now. I was 19. I had started my transition like medically. I was going back and forth to the clinic, um, and something started to go wrong. I started to like feel sick, but not like a cold sick, just like sick in my body, really fatigued. And I was going back and forth to the doctors, letting them know that. And they were like, oh, like these kind of things can happen when you're taking hormones. I was kind of like overdosing on hormones, getting them off the street. And 3 months later, the provider had asked me, because they kind of like switched providers at that clinic, had asked me when was the last time I had an HIV test. But yeah, I definitely felt like I had it before then, before I was diagnosed with it. Yeah. And that was stressful. 19, I was engaged in sex work. Then all of this shame came, where it was like, I'm not going to be able to do that. Usually I would have my papers posted up by the bed in the hotels and stuff like that, so it wasn't even a question. And so that was really a trying time for me. That happened in March. My younger brother had passed away very violently the following month. And so it just seemed like my world was kind of like crashing. I decided to tell my grandmother. I felt like I needed to tell somebody. She was super disappointed. She was super disappointed. It was just like, oh, I thought you were cleaner than that. What were you doing? I knew that this was going to happen. Like everything you could think of, she was saying. And that was hurtful. I asked her to keep it to herself, and she didn't. When I was my grandma, my grandmother, when she would get off the phone, before she would hang up, you can always already hear her talking to the people that's around. And so that was challenging. My grandmother raised me from a tot, so she's my mother. And so the disappointment that I heard in her voice was just like just even more depression came. Like, oh, like I'm gonna be going through this alone. I slowly started sharing with my close relatives that I was positive, and their reaction was like, oh, we love you and nothing's gonna change. But then there was like little subtleties that let me know that things did change. Smoking weed together, and eating and hugging and kissing the babies, like things that we know don't transmit HIV. The stigma was still very high. And it wasn't something that was really talked about. So I definitely was depressed. I also felt alone. Who wants to share that they're positive if people are gonna respond like this, right? In the beginning, I wasn't taking the medicine. I wasn't taking it. It was kind of sort of like I didn't want to deal with it. Is this something that I really committed to doing? Are these medicines going to interfere with my transition? Because as a trans person, my hormones are everything. I started my hormone journey before I knew I was positive. And those were the questions that were coming up. It was like, well, if I can't take my hormones, I'm not going to take these medications. My attitude actually changed because I went to jail. And going into jail, into booking, they're asking all these questions. And one of the questions was about your status, and I had to answer it. And in jail, I had to take the medication, right? It wasn't gonna give me my hormones if I wasn't taking all of that. And I started kind of just taking my medicine. And that kind of just happened overnight for me taking the medicine. HIV and homelessness for me was pretty interesting. There were moments where I couldn't take my medicine. It was kind of sort of like out of sight, out of mind. There would be moments where I would totally forget that I'm positive because I don't have any symptoms. And being homeless, sleeping on the streets or couch surfing, those were not things that were in my mind. My safety was how I was going to eat, where was I going to how to shower and stuff like that. There were often times where my stuff would get stolen or left on the bus or different little situations. And so I didn't always have access to the medicine. There was also a time when I was homeless and I didn't have insurance. And so I wasn't able to get medicine from the pharmacy. And the pharmacist wasn't really that helpful. I didn't find out about ADAP until like 6 months of me not being able to pick up my medicine. One of the pharmacists was just like, oh, have you heard of this program? And gave me a number. I was like, I've never heard of this. No one's told me. And so, yeah, homelessness definitely was tricky. When I got out of jail, I needed to be reconnected to services. And 2015, I was connected to World, Women Organized to Respond to Life-Threatening Diseases, going to their peer support group. And all of these women talked about being positive at the start of all of this, back in the 80s. And they were just regular people. And they were sharing stories, and some folks were like involved in advocacy. Some folks were just coming to the group for support. And that kind of shifted things for me. To see them was to let me know that I wasn't gonna die. And to know that they had that dedication to like, erase the stigma from HIV, I was sold. And so I started kind of doing a little advocacy stuff with them. Like we would show up at the Capitol and do protests and stuff. We would get people to, we would lobby and get people to sign stuff for us. And I remember we were lobbying in San Jose, but a part of that pitch, I had to share why I thought it was important to lower the medications and to share my experience. That was so powerful to me, to be able to say it out loud to strangers. And I was saying it all day. And it was like, like I don't have to be ashamed of this. Like, this is something that I have. There's consequences to the things that we do. However, I am not HIV, and HIV is not me. Like, it doesn't have to control my life the way that I had allowed it to control my life for the first few years. I then got a job at that same organization as a peer advocate for the trans community. When I got married, I could no longer do sex work. I really could no longer do sex work, right? And it was like, organization, how else am I gonna make money? I was trying to get jobs. And showing up visibly trans, they was not having it. Like, I can get the job, be there for a week, and then I'm laid off. And so I kind of had to like try to reinvent myself in a sense. And so when I was going to that organization and was talking all this talk about like, are there trans people here? Like, I want to talk to somebody that I can relate to outside of just cis women. And so then I became that advocate. They seen an advocate in me. They seen that before I was able to see that. I've always been someone who spoke up and took up for other people, but I never thought of myself as an advocate. World definitely really changed my life. That was my first nonprofit job. That was my first real entryway into this field. And it was like, oh, this is what they mean when they say that you create your own family. You have new family. They had become my family. They had welcomed me in. It didn't matter that I was trans. It didn't matter that I was positive. People just wanted to get to know me. And so community really changed my heart. Seeing community and knowing that my voice could change things or amplify things, help get resources, was key for me. I was working at World. Had a dual role. I left peer advocacy and was doing outreach and linkage. And I was sitting in my other clinic and I had a new positive. And they did all the stuff that they went through as far as getting signed up, and then they would come to me to get connected to resources. And the person was younger than me, a few years younger than me. And at that time I had to be 26, so they were probably 23. And was just really distraught. And I didn't know what to do. It was like, you kind of let them have those emotions. And then I kind of just felt inclined to share my story. I'm positive. And they kind of like looked up at me like, really? And I was like, yeah, like, it's not a death sentence. I know they probably just told you out there and it's probably like cliche, but that is real. And I am a living testimony of that, and that you will be okay. And that I will be here to support you throughout this journey. Whatever it is that you need, I'll be here for that. And I still see them to this day. They're in community, and so sometimes we bump into each other, and they're always saying how I've changed their life and changed their perspective. They're doing great, they look great. And so to be able to offer them that support at the beginning of this journey, I felt like was really crucial and probably like my biggest accomplishment. Yeah.